Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hemophilia Federation of America's Pride Project webinar series. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Ziva Mann, and I am a person with Hemophilia A, and heaven help me, the mother of a teenager with severe Hemophilia A. And it's my pleasure to be hosting you this evening. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few helpful webinar tips courtesy of HFA. This evening's webinar will last approximately 1 hour and is being recorded for future playback. We certainly welcome your participation and questions during the webinar. However, your audio will be muted during the entirety of the webinar, as this helps limit background noise that might disrupt the presentation. If you have a question, we encourage you to type it into the question box located at the bottom of your control panel. Questions will be passed along to the presenter to be addressed at the end of the webinar. Tonight's webinar presentation is called Pride Project. How do I use PCOR/CER as a community member? This is the 4th webinar in the Pride Project's 6-part webinar series, building on previous webinars which focused on Research 101 and ways to participate in patient-centered outcomes research, or PCOR, and comparative outcomes research, or CER. This webinar will focus on how members of the bleeding disorder community use the finding of patient-centered outcomes research in their lives. Sounds very practical. Our presenter tonight is Wendy Owens, HFA's Research Director and Principal Investigator for the HFA's Choice Project. Ms. Owens is the Director of Research at HFA, and as the Principal Investigator for the Choice Project, she's responsible for a collaborative project between HFA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. Prior to joining the HFA, Wendy was the founder and executive coordinator for the New England Coalition for Affordable Prescription Drugs and the advocacy coordinator for the New England Hemophilia Association. Wendy began her career in the private sector, starting and running several companies in educational technologies and materials engineering. And for over 14 years, Ms. Owens was an advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce and U.S. Trade Representative on internal trade. Now I'm going to turn it over to her for a presentation.
Thank you, Ziva, very much for that introduction, and welcome everybody to our webinar tonight. As we've walked you through the process of getting to know research and patient-centered outcome research and comparative effectiveness research, well, we are now starting on how you actually use that research to your benefit or to the benefit of your family or loved ones. First, I need to tell you that this presentation is funded through a Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, Eugene, Washington PCORI Engagement Award. This is our award number and our period for the award from April 1st, 2017 through March 31st, 2019. We very much appreciate the support of PCORI in this project. So just to give you a little overview of what we're going to be covering tonight, we'll do a little recap of PCOR and CER, and then why. Why are we giving this webinar? Why is it important to use those results? How can they improve health outcomes, and where do you find them? And then once you find them and you read them, where can you get your questions about the results answered? And also, finally, if no one's researched a topic you're interested in, what course of action do you take then? So a little refresher here. PCOR, as defined by the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, helps people and their caregivers make informed healthcare decisions. So this allows the patients to have a voice in their healthcare decision in the healthcare process. And you're able to then assess the value of your care options. So that's the result of this research will be what we're talking about today and how you make use of it. And then comparative effectiveness research really is just what it says. It basically is a question of what works better, X or Y, and why is that better? And you can see here from this diagram that everybody is involved in these two types of research, and they benefit, this type of research benefits all these different groups to help patients improve their health outcomes, to help them make decisions about the direction of their treatment, etc. But everybody has a stake in the process of PCOR and CER research. A couple of questions just for your thoughts as you're learning about this topic. Why is it important to be aware of research results? Why is it important to you, to your family, to those that you love, to be aware of the research results that relate to you, a specific chronic disease you have, a condition, etc.? And how do you use these results to improve your health? These are things that I want you to think about during our webinar. So why? Why use the results of this research? Well, really so you can be a part of the solution overall. In many situations, there's no single right decision. It's really based on the patient and their needs. So what you want to do is talk about treatments, medical tests, health issues, and the pros and cons of those. And by doing that, in order to do that, I should say, you need to become informed. And that means doing a little research on your own. And that allows you then to go in and to speak with, or email, or text, or however you communicate with your healthcare provider to help be part of making the decision. So you share the decision maker with the healthcare provider. There may be more than one reasonable option, such as screening or actually doing a treatment, and one option may not have a clear advantage. But there are other possibilities when the benefits and the harm of each option will affect you as a patient differently other than another patient. So it's important to have this information. So the goal here is called shared decision making. And that's a process where you work together with your healthcare provider to select tests and treatments and care plans based on the evidence that's out there. What is the clinical evidence that's out there? Not hearsay, not guesswork, but actual evidence that's presented as a function of the completion of this type of research. That way you can balance risk, and you can set expectations for both you and your provider, and you can say, you know, this is what's valuable to me, and so I would like to follow this course of action based on this specific evidence presented as a result of this research. So here's how it works. What you would do, and what we strongly suggest patients do now to be part of that decision-making process, is to review the PCOR and CER research results. And then you as a patient takes this information to your healthcare provider, and then you and your healthcare provider can have an informed discussion. And so it really takes into account the process of this kind of evidence-based information about healthcare options, the benefits and harms, and you can then learn what your provider knows about the different options and about this information, and see what their experience is. And then you can say, no, this is what's better for me, or that's what's better for me based on my values and my overall preferences. So it's interesting because they ask providers about this process. And so providers who are using this shared decision-making process really like it, because they find their patients are more knowledgeable and better prepared to talk. It helps the patient understand what outcome are we trying to reach together to make your life better. And it also builds a relationship between doctor and patients, and it's a trusting relationship because together you're making a decision. And this has also led to satisfaction for both the patient and the physician. And most importantly, patients who participate in this process of the shared decision-making based on their own information collecting and knowledge, and based on their expertise, because as a patient, you are an expert in your own disease, in your own life, and how you live your life with this disease, or your child, or your husband's, or your, whoever your loved one might be, how you guys cope with this disease every day. So as an expert, you and the provider then can work together to make sure that you're making the right decision for you at the right time. And this is likely to lead you to understand better what needs to be done and to follow through on what needs to be done. So no longer are we having doctors just dictate to patients, oh, here's what you need to go home and do, and this is absolutely it. No, there is a process that you bring your expertise to the table, they bring their expertise to the table, together you communicate, and then you make an informed decision together. Well, there is lots of information out there about various health conditions, about different studies and what the results are. Some of it's summarized to the point where, well, you don't get a lot out of it. This is just a graphic to show that there are newspapers all over the country and all online, and all may have different information out there. Some of it's credible, some of it may not be credible. So there's lots of places to learn about information from research, but is it presented in practical terms? Can you understand it? And how do you assess this? So let's talk about how we find results and assess results from research and see if the source of this information is credible. So first question you would ask, is this article or summary or whatever it happened to be on a trusted site, someplace that you are aware of, that you would trust, that you know would have information on it that you could use going forward and that you could take to your doctor and say, this is what I learned from this location. And you want to look at for certain things in the article, and what I'm going to refer to as an article at this point in time. You know, is it missing what are called citations? Is it those citations that point to other articles that support the information that's in that article? Are there references to other articles? Are there references to books? Are there quotes from people who would be authorities in certain areas that is the focus of the article? And maybe are there links? Are there links from this article to further and additional information? These are important things to look for. And if the author's name is listed, which it should be, when you're looking for information that are the results of PCOR and CER, you should have author's information listed right there. And you would want to find out, are they a trustworthy individual? And you can Google them and see if they are on LinkedIn and see maybe what institution they work with or where they're from. You know, you might want to go with your gut sometimes, because when you read information and you having the expertise that you have in your management of your chronic disease, management of comorbidities, whatever it might be you'll be looking up, and this is not just for bleeding disorders, you know, it doesn't sound right to you. Does it fit with what you've heard before? Does it fit with your experience? And if it doesn't, you may want to question whether this is valid information. Can you find a similar article online that looks at something similar to what's being broached in the article you're reading? And does the article only showcase one side of an argument? Is it just arguing for one treatment option or for one type of test? And if that's the case, then it should present enough evidence to support that argument that you feel comfortable that they've done their research and that these outcomes are legitimate. So you trust yourself. All right, so finding this stuff, you know, you could go to Google Scholar, which a lot of people like to start with, but that's a giant web search engine that basically indexes the text. So it goes through the text of all these articles that are published across different formats and in different disciplines. And then, as you see here, I typed in hemophilia and got over 250,000 results, different articles which have the word hemophilia in them. That's a little too much. You may not want to filter through all of that. And of course, you can be more specific in your search language, but Google Scholars is going to take you directly to scholarly articles that will be written often in scientific language. And for some people may be fully accessible, and other people may want to have it in more practical terms. So one place you can look is what's called PubMed Central. It's a free full text archive of biomedical and life science journal articles. This is from the National Institutes of Health. So this looks at specific journal articles. So journal articles often are articles that are put into what are called scientific journals, and they've been reviewed by a panel of the researchers' peers. And this review process is very serious because they look very hard at the process that was undertaken to conduct the research. What questions were asked? Were human subjects used? So you can usually count on these journal articles when they're published being pretty good sources of information, though not necessarily practically accessible. So there are a number of government agencies that have said, okay, we really want patients to get the information and the results from PCOR and CER studies. So here's Effective Healthcare Program. This is a nice site. It provides evidence outcomes, benefits and harms, and appropriateness of drugs, devices, and healthcare services. And so you can see that there's a section that is specifically for consumers, and that will have practical information on a number of different topics. So you could search, just search right here, and then learn more about different topics. Now, further narrowing it, if you want specifically to look for PCOR results, there's the Library of PCOR resources, also offered by the Agency of Healthcare Research and Quality. I thought this was a fun site because you could go in and you can see specifically PCOR research that's been conducted. And the nice thing is that it's not just the results of the research, but it tells you a lot about who conducted it, if it was conducted by a public, private, or nonprofit or academic source. And it's, you know, offers not only the findings, but there's some tools, online tools that it offers as well that you may be able to use. So a specific example is here. I just searched for von Willebrand's. And you see here that we have information about this specific study that started in 2015 and ended in 2017. It even talks about the grant and how much the grant was for this, for Sarah O'Brien to be looking at ways to reach out to women who may not know they have von Willebrand's disease. And so they're thinking that 1% of all women in the United States have an undiagnosed bleeding disorder. So there has to be a way to find these women and reach out to them. The nice thing about this is the results here talk about specifically that. How do you find these folks? And so for us as an advocacy organization from HFA's perspective, it's very helpful. But if you have von Willebrand's disease and you want to find out how to support and advocate for women who have not been diagnosed and may not be aware of it, it's good information to have. So again, this is specifically PCOR results. Another opportunity is to go to the PCORI website, again, Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute. 76% of their research dollars go to research projects that actually compare the effectiveness of one or more approaches to healthcare. And that's not only is that maybe treatment, but also services and testing. And then here's an example. So the great little study that they did on antibiotics for children, very important to see, you know, should you give children antibiotics for earaches and sore throats and upper and respiratory infections? And if you should, what kind? So comparing two types of antibiotics here, whether it is the broad spectrum antibiotics or a more narrow spectrum series of the drug. And so this is going to be an article for anyone at all who has children, or even if you yourself want to be very careful about the types of antibiotics you take and maybe bacteria building up an immunity to those antibiotics. I would suggest you go to the site and just take a look. They actually have some featured research that's very interesting. Now, to further support their mission, PCORI is putting together, and it's not available yet, but it should be available soon, what they call the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Translation Center. What they're doing is they're putting together all their research, and they're going to put together easy-to-read summaries for patients and the general public, describing the results of the research and how the general public can use the results of these research. So PCORI is very patient-centered. Where they know that you know a lot about what's happening to you, they want to take that one step further. So again, you can contribute to the shared decision-making process and have that additional knowledge to discuss with your healthcare providers, your doctor, your social worker, your physical therapist, etc., your physician. And so they're also offering, in parallel with that, not only just something for the patients, but also summaries for clinicians and other healthcare providers that highlight the study details, in addition to offering all the findings. So a quick way for providers to go online and say, oh yeah, how about this, and what were the results of that? And if they need to dig deeper, they can. You too, you can dig deeper as well. Now, you have your article. You read your article, your several articles, you read the summaries, you read what has now been taken from a more scientific perspective down to a more practical perspective that's accessible to anyone who might pick up the article and read it. And you have questions. So write those down, make notes in the margin, type them out however you prefer to do. And then ask your questions. There's no reason you can't ask, and there's no reason you can't just contact the author of the article directly, or authors. There may be more than one. Normally with these articles, the author's contact information is provided, just like you saw with the von Willebrand's the example that I provided you. Had you clicked on O'Brien, Sarah H., you would have gotten her email address, and you could have sent her an email and asked her specific questions about the results of her research. Researchers really appreciate the opportunity to communicate with patients about their research and enjoy having these questions. Also, print out a copy, email a copy, somehow send a copy of the article to your healthcare provider with whom you want to discuss the research itself. They too want to learn more, and they may not have come across this research, but here you go, there it is, and there's your opportunity to talk with them about it. I would recommend sending it along to them in advance. You may just bring it in your hand with you to your visit, but they may not have had the opportunity prior to your visit to review this information so that they can speak with you in an informed manner about it. So it's always good to give them a little time to have a look at it, and therefore you walk in prepared and they're prepared as well. So what if you have a research topic or a question and you can't find any research that's been done on it? Well, here at HFA, we want to know what we should do research on, and we want to hear from you, because we believe that as experts, you guys are not only just participants in research, but we want you to be the originators of research ideas, and we also want you to participate on research teams. We are running a project right now in gene therapy that is, we have 50 people who volunteered to be on our research team, and they will be compensated for their participation. And we are really excited to initiate this and to start this off at HFA so that we hear you. We know that you wanted to know more about gene therapy. Now, what do you want to know and how do you want to learn it? Well, we're going to work with our 50 research participants and have on our research team and work with them to develop a survey, and we'll be putting that survey out there and ask you, what do you want to know about gene therapy and how do you want to learn it? So we're very excited about that. So we hope you participate. We really, really encourage you to, and you are the core of our research team. We really need to use your expertise, and we appreciate all that you have to offer. In addition, we're going to be building a network of researchers and patients. So as we collect these questions that you submit, we'll also be sharing them with a number of researchers so that they can choose from those questions. Say, hey, I would really like to look at this question. I didn't realize that was a question that's important to this community. Hey, that's something that I think I can do. And so we want to connect you with them, put you on the research team, and get this research done in a way that really will be of benefit to patients and caregivers everywhere. So a little quiz as we're just finishing up our webinar here, the presentation section, then we'll get to some questions. So true or false? Patients who are part of the healthcare decision-making process have better follow-through on healthcare treatments and care. Well, that is true. So being part of that process of healthcare making decisions gives patients ownership of the decisions that are made about their treatment and care. True or false? It is difficult to find information on the results of PCOR and CER research related to the topics in which I'm interested. I would say false. Government agencies and institutions are working to make practical information on the results of PCOR and CER available online for free. They may not have everything specifically that you would like to have in terms of the results of PCOR and patient-centered outcome research, but certainly comparative effectiveness research. Is this better than that? Should I use this methodology or that methodology? And that you can certainly be informed by that. Now, some of it might not be always in practical summarized versions and maybe more in scientific papers like we talked about earlier, but it's out there. So what's next for us? In our PRIDE project, as part of this training process, we are going to next be at our symposium in Cleveland from April 26th to the 29th. You can register online now, and we will be holding several research related sessions, including more training about PCOR and CER. And one of the things that we also will have researchers there at Symposium, people you can talk to, ask questions, engage with. They're really looking forward to participating in Symposium and having the opportunity to engage with patients, because they don't get very much opportunity. But here we are now focused on the patient-centered side of healthcare, talking about shared decision-making and having patients informed by the information that's out there. And we want you to engage with these researchers. So I say thank you very much for your attention to this portion of the webinar. We're going to move to questions, and I will hand it back to Ziva.
Thank you, Wendy, for that helpful and useful information. So as Wendy said, we are now going to open up the webinar for questions. Your line will remain muted, but you can type your questions in the question box at the bottom of your control panel, and I'll read them off to Wendy. And I have to say, while people are typing their questions in, Wendy, I really liked your tip about sending the article beforehand to your doctors so they have a chance to read it. I remember turning up with an article in my hand one time to my annual visit, the HTC, and my hematologist looked at my article and said, "That's not relevant to you." I thought, ooh. But we had a great conversation because he saw that I was interested. And I wanted to ask you, if somebody has never really gone online and looked for PCOR or CER research, can you think of some examples of the kinds of research that's been done that might be useful to me when I'm going to talk to my hematologist?
Sure, and there's lots of different types of research out there beyond, of course, just bleeding disorders. But maybe when you're going to your hematologist, it may have to do with treatment times of day. You know, what's a better time of day to treat? It may have to do with types of treatment. It may have to do with looking at how you figure out, are you having a bleed, are you not having a bleed? It might have to do with the dosing. So there's lots of different ways to approach. Maybe you're having an issue that's very specific to that, or you have a question about, you know, my child is now 12 years old or 13 years old, and in the past year they've grown 6 inches, and I know my children grow that fast sometimes. You know, should we change our dosing that much? What's better at a child for this age? It really depends on the information that's important to you and important to your child or the person in your family. So, you know, if you look back again at that von Willebrand's example, you may have some idea that there's von Willebrand's in your family, but how do you make that assessment? What's important to know? What are the symptoms and signs? And if you have those, then what are the best treatments for von Willebrand's for women? And that then is the comparative effectiveness side. This treatment might be better for women who have type 1 and it's less severe, and this might be better for type 3 and it's more severe, and depends on what has been shown to be most effective.
Thank you. I asked you for one example and you gave me a buffet. That was great. So you mentioned that sometimes the articles will show up in like a medical journal or something like that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, often they will.
Okay. So for those of us who don't speak medical jargon as a native language, any tips on understanding what's being written about there?
Yeah, you know, one thing that's really nice about these journal articles is that they're required to provide right at the beginning an abstract, a summary, in other words, of the research that they did and their findings. And I find that those abstracts are pretty well accessible to people and gives you a context for what took place within that research. And also gives you an opportunity to learn some new keywords that you may want to look up and search outside of that article online. And if you find that article, it looks like something that's important to you, and the abstract really sounds like something that could make a difference for you or for one of your loved ones, then take it with you or email it to your provider and say, look, I haven't been able to find a practical summary of this article. Can you help me understand a few things? Is this applicable to me? Is this something we should be looking into? Should we discuss this on our next visit?
So thank you. That was great. That's actually, I kind of like the idea of learning with my doctor. Another question's come in. In the last couple of years, there's been many new treatment options. I've been very lucky with my hematologist who's willing to listen and go through different new research with me. It's not always the case. That's true. Not always the case that doctors are comfortable with that. How can parents approach doctors who are reluctant to hear or answer questions?
Well, I would suggest that you first get information about your question. And if you can do some research, particularly on the new products that are coming out and also the emerging products that are coming out, you'll learn about those. If you then are able to approach your doctor and to ask questions, it gives you an opportunity, in all honesty, to assess their knowledge of these opportunities and whether they also need to learn more. So you've done your homework and you come with a level of expertise. Do they also can match you in that expertise? And if they can't, it may be that they're not the right person to talk to at the time because they need to be more informed and better informed. And certainly your questions that they may not be able to answer would signal that, you would hope. But if you also can find alternatives. You may want to contact a doctor who was part of the clinical trials for the product that's emerging or is currently up on the clinical trial. And clinicaltrials.gov will list this information. You may want to contact the manufacturer, the pharmaceutical company or biotech company directly. They often have patient lines, and they have what are called medical affairs officers or medical affairs liaisons that can speak to your medical questions about a specific product or emerging therapy. So yes, you may be challenged to discuss something with your doctor, but there are other resources to reach out to have your questions answered.
Thanks, Wendy. That's great. I did have one piece of advice that someone gave me early on, which is always tell them why you're asking the question. Sometimes I find that helps doctors engage with me, but not always. So that was really great to hear that there are other places to go. We have another question that's come in. What will happen to all the research questions we submit to HFA? I would love to see some of my research questions in action.
We would too, and we love the fact that everyone submitted so many research questions. We've had over 800 questions submitted so far. So here's what we're doing. A lot of the questions are very similar, so we're categorizing them, and we're coming up with ways that we can have sort of a 1 or 2, 3 or 4 top 10 questions on which we can focus our research efforts. And we're taking those to researchers to see who might be interested in answering these questions. And we find it interesting that some researchers are surprised. Hey, no, I wouldn't have thought of that as a question that patients have in research that we need to figure out. And so we're working on that. We are actually looking at a number of different grants opportunities and talking with researchers and other organizations about doing some research. And these include the American Heart Association, National Kidney Foundation, National Liver Foundation, because some of the questions that have come in are not about bleeding disorders, but how to treat comorbidities and your bleeding disorder. So, very practical questions that have come in. Some of the questions that have come in are ones that we want to be able to answer through our programming. So we are developing programming specifically around these questions. And we will continue to look to doing research, but some of it I think we can address right now in getting new information out there that has already been researched, and there are results from PCOR studies or CER studies that we can make available. So we want to continue to get your questions. Please send those along because it lets us know what you're interested in, what you need as a community, what information is most important to you. So we will continue to find ways to conduct this research, but we have some grants to apply for.
Wow, 800 questions. Thank you, Wendy. I'm a little stuck on the 800. It's like a jaw-dropping number. We've got another question. If I can't make it to this year's symposium, how can I get engaged or continue to get engaged? I want to stay engaged, not get lost from missing the annual meeting. Would you be coming to local organizations?
Yes, as part of our Pride project, we are making our webinars available online. We are having teach immersions. We are having opportunities for when people come to DC to learn more about PCOR and CER and how to participate. And we also will be doing presentations on it at local organization meetings. And our final big push, which will be our symposium next year, in case you can't attend that, we'll be doing an online live town hall version so that we can get as many people as possible to participate. So I would encourage you to go back and look at the webinars. We have an online training course that's going to be coming up very soon, so we'll be promoting that. And we would love, love, love for you to continue to participate in research, whether that is as a research team member through one of our opportunities that we're offering, or also to participate and take our Choice 2.0 survey, which it will continue to inform our research efforts and continue to inform our advocacy and programming as well. So Choice 2.0 is now available on our HFA community research portal, and we'd love to get you to participate there. But check our research page online and watch for e-blasts and social media posts about how to continue to access information on PCOR and CER.
Sounds like an exciting time to be in your shoes, Wendy. I have one question of my own, if you don't mind.
Oh, please. Thank you.
So you mentioned that sometimes an article might show only like one side of an argument. What does that look like? Can you give me an example? Like, how would I recognize that?
Well, usually the articles that you want to avoid that show one side of the argument are fairly extreme. They may be a bit impractical in the way that they argue for only a single approach. That may be to a single approach to treatment, to a diet plan, to a certain test. And so oftentimes in research, you'll come to a conclusion and you'll say at the end, the conclusion is that actually X works better than Y within this context and for these people. If the article lacks that, is not reputable, I guess is the right way to put it. It may not provide any data or support. It may not discuss how this conclusion was arrived at by the authors. It may not have citations or not even have an author's name. It may just simply be promoting one kind of treatment or product or approach. So again, a little bit of go with your gut. Again, as a patient, you guys are experts in your disease and how you manage it and live every day with it. And just be careful. Be careful what you believe.
Sounds like you're talking about something that's a little bit like clickbait, or maybe a little like an advertisement.
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
Okay, I can recognize those, I think. We have one more question. Can you give me an example of like what kinds of research questions were surprising to the researchers?
One of the questions that came up was about financial planning, and what kind of with someone with a chronic disease who, as we have a population that's aging, what kind of financial planning should we do, and what approach to financial planning should we take? There was also a question about exercise. HFA had done a lot of fit factor work and so forth, but the exercise was very specific to yoga and stretching and pliety, basically, with muscles. Not just strengthening muscles, but also just being able to stretch and move and have that range of motion in the joints that sometimes is difficult when you have a target joint and maybe it becomes difficult to move around. But they actually wanted to know, and specific to this was not just joint bleeds, but there are specific type of exercise that helps with muscle bleeds. And what's the preferred method for that? So that was something that I would say, nope, hadn't thought of that one.
Those are great questions. I'm so glad that you guys are capturing all of these. Financial planning is something we talk about a lot in our house. And also, how do you get the, what exercises will help you after a bleed? This is wonderful.
It really helps us to prioritize, and that's what I like about getting information and the questions directly from the community. What's important to them? That's what we want to do. This is what this is about. It's now patient-centered. Our research is patient-centered. It's patient-focused, and it's also patient-driven. So we want to make sure we hear from the community.
Yeah, and I think you're also getting a good picture of what matters to patients. And the fact that it's such a wide range of concerns or things that matter to us that we want to learn more about, we want guidance on, that's a really good thing, I think, for a doctor to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
They certainly like it. Yeah.
Nope. This is wonderful. I hope that list gets published when you guys are finished, because I certainly want to see it.
Very soon. Yep. We're working on that right now.
Oh, that's great. Well, if we don't have any more questions, then on that note, Wendy, I want to thank you again for your time and not only your insightful presentation, but your really thoughtful answers to these questions. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available shortly on HFA's website via the resource library and on HFA's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please contact research@hemophiliafed.org or simply reply to the webinar confirmation email you received. We also ask you to please complete the short evaluation that will pop up on your screen once this webinar concludes. Thanks again, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.